The house lay silent, the kind of silence that felt staged, heavy, and watchful. Claire Hartwell's phone buzzed once against the nightstand. She turned, half asleep, expecting another meaningless notification. Instead, the words glared at her through the darkness. "Help me." Sent from Daniel's number. Her chest tightened. She sat up, clutching the phone as though squeezing it could summon him back. Seconds passed, then minutes. No follow-up, no call. Just silence. She typed his name, her thumb stumbling across the screen, but every message went unanswered. "Daniel," she whispered into the darkened room as if he could hear her. The walls seemed to absorb her voice. By 2 a.m, she was pacing the hallway, each creak of the wooden floor loud enough to unnerve her. She dialed his number again, straight to voicemail. Her breathing grew sharp, her reflection in the hallway mirror catching her eye. Pale skin, eyes hollowed by fear. Daniel was never late. Never unreachable. He was the kind of man who phoned if he was 5 minutes behind schedule. Tonight he was hours overdue, and the only trace left of him was a single desperate plea. The message replayed in her mind, but the tone twisted each time she thought about it. Was he trapped, injured? Or was it something else, a performance of fear designed to wound her? Claire shook her head violently at the thought, guilt colliding with dread. At 3:15, headlights should have pulled into the driveway. Instead, the outside remained dark, the gravel untouched. Claire stood by the door, waiting for the familiar sound of his keys in the lock, but it never came. Only the buzz of her phone again, this time from an unknown number. She stared at the screen, frozen. The unknown number vanished as quickly as it appeared. No voicemail, no message. By dawn, Claire's body felt hollow from a night without sleep. She pulled the curtains wide, expecting Daniel's car in the drive. The gravel lay untouched, wet from the morning rain, no sign of him returning. Her trembling hand dialed his office. A clipped voice answered, "Mr. Hartwell never checked in. He wasn't scheduled for leave." Claire's stomach dropped, her voice breaking as she stammered a thank you before ending the call. Daniel was gone, not just absent. By 9, 2 uniformed officers stood in her kitchen, their radios crackling faintly. Claire wrapped her arms around herself as she spoke, but her words felt jagged and unreliable. "He sent me a message, just one, help me." Then silence. The younger officer scribbled in his notebook, glancing up sharply. "And what time was this, Mrs. Hartwell?" "Just after midnight," she whispered, her throat tightening. "Why didn't you call us immediately?" The question sliced through the room, cold and clinical. "I thought he'd walk through the door. I thought I was overreacting," she snapped, voice rising before cracking. "He is my husband." "He wouldn't vanish." The senior officer's eyes narrowed, watching her too closely, measuring every flicker of fear. "Did you and Mr. Hartwell argue yesterday?" Claire's breath caught. The truth lodged like a stone in her throat. There had been tension, unspoken words, things she wasn't ready to share. Her hesitation painted her guilt before she even spoke. They searched the driveway with torches, their beams slicing the pale morning fog. Neighbors lingered behind curtains, whispering. Claire stood in the doorway, pale under the harsh light, the suspicion pressing against her skin like shackles. The detective finally approached, voice low and cutting. "Mrs. Hartwell, until we find your husband, everything about last night matters. Even the secrets you'd rather keep." Claire's heart faltered. Secrets, the word struck too close. Detective Rowan Ashcroft leaned back in the chair opposite Claire. His notepad half-filled, his eyes unreadable. He tapped the page once with his pen before speaking. "We've reviewed Mr. Hartwell's recent phone records. There are irregularities." Claire's fingers tightened on the hem of her blouse. "Irregularities." Her voice sounded thinner than she intended. Ashcroft slid a copy of the records across the table. Numbers she didn't recognize stared back at her, late-night calls repeating over weeks. One entry was highlighted. This one, over 40 minutes. Female voice on the other end, confirmed by a colleague who overheard him in the office. Claire shook her head. Too fast, too sharp. No, Daniel wouldn't. He was reliable, steady. He wasn't that man. The detective's expression hardened, the silence in the room suffocating. He leaned forward, his words measured. "Mrs. Hartwell, affairs are not uncommon in cases like these. It gives motive, leverage, enemies. You're certain you knew nothing?" Her throat burned as she forced the words out. "I'm certain. We had arguments, but never that. He loved me. Yet even as she said it, memories twisted against her. Daniel coming home later than usual, his phone face down, always on silent. The way he sometimes avoided her eyes during dinner. The perfect husband she had built in her mind began to fracture under the weight of suspicion. By evening, whispers bled beyond the walls of her home. A neighbor muttered in passing, "Man vanish for a reason." In the cafe down the street, someone claimed to have seen Daniel with a woman, her silhouette blurred by steam on the window. Claire clenched her jaw until it ached. Ashcroft returned, placing a single photograph on the table, a woman's face blurred, yet familiar enough to churn Claire's stomach. "Her name has come up more than once," he said. "We need to know what she meant to your husband." Claire's pulse thundered. A stranger or a ghost from his past? The photograph on the table burned into Claire's mind long after the detectives left. The blurred woman's outline was enough to unlock a memory Daniel had buried. A name surfaced with a chill, Lena Markham. She had heard it only once, years ago, in a careless slip from Daniel's lips, quickly brushed aside as someone from the past. Now that past had returned with teeth. By late afternoon, Claire stood outside a run-down block of flats on the far side of Bristol, her knuckles white around her handbag strap. The intercom crackled before a voice answered, jagged and amused. "So you finally came." The door buzzed open. Inside, Elena's apartment reeked of stale smoke and perfume gone sour. Cigarette haze coiled lazily in the air, as if the room itself were taunting Claire. Elena sat slouched in a chair, dark hair falling across one eye. Lips curled in something between a smile and a sneer. "You look worse than I imagined," Elena said, exhaling smoke in Claire's direction. "I want to know what he was doing with you," Claire snapped, her voice quivering despite her attempt at steel. Elena's laugh was low, bitter, carved with years of resentment. Daniel never knew what he wanted. Men like him circle back eventually. They always do, and when they do, they leave wreckage behind. Claire's nails dug into her palm. "Did you see him? The night he vanished?" For the first time, Elena's mask cracked, her eyes flashing with something raw. "He came here, shaking, paranoid, convinced someone was after him. But he left before dawn." "He always leaves," Elena leaned forward, her tone venomous. "Ask yourself this, Claire, was he running from me or from you?" Claire staggered back, her skin cold, her thoughts spiraling. The visit to Elena lingered in Claire's chest like poison, her mind circling those final words. "Running from me or from you?" She barely noticed the knock at her door until it came again, firmer this time. Detective Rowan Ashcroft stepped inside, his expression grave. "We've recovered fragments from your husband's phone," he said. "You need to hear them." At the station, a forensic technician placed the cracked device on the table, its screen fractured like a spider's web. Files appeared in stuttering lines of code, broken, corrupted. "This is what survived," the technician muttered, pressing play. Static filled the room, then Daniel's voice emerged, shaky, close to panic. "Don't, please." A heavy thud followed, then silence. Another fragment revealed muffled breathing, the sound of footsteps, and finally a scream so raw it rattled Claire's bones. The recording cut off in abrupt static, as though the world itself had swallowed him whole. Claire's hands shot to her ears. She shook her head violently. "That isn't him. It can't be." Ashcroft's gaze fixed on her, sharp and unyielding. "You recognize the voice, though, don't you?" Her throat closed. She wanted to deny it, to say it belonged to someone else, but every syllable had Daniel's cadence, Daniel's fear. Tears blurred her vision as guilt clawed at her chest. The detective leaned closer. "Fear leaves traces, Mrs. Hartwell, but guilt leaves deeper ones." "Which do you think we're hearing?" Her breath faltered, the walls pressing in. She remembered Elena's smirk, her warning, the cracks in Daniel's careful facade. If he had enemies, why did the recording sound so intimate, so close to home? Ashcroft closed the file, his voice low. "This isn't just a disappearance anymore. Someone wanted him silenced." Claire gripped the table, her heart pounding, as the door behind them creaked open to reveal a stranger's shadow waiting. The shadow that stretched across the doorway belonged to a man Claire hadn't seen in almost a decade. Marcus Hartwell stepped into the dim light of the station, his presence heavy, his expression sharpened by years of bitterness. He carried a scuffed suitcase in one hand, as though he had walked straight out of exile. Marcus, Claire whispered, the name sour on her tongue. His eyes flicked over her, cold and assessing. So the Golden Boys vanished. Can't say I'm shocked. Detective Ashcroft studied him with measured caution. You're Daniel's brother? Estranged brother, Marcus corrected, a smirk tugging at his lips. Family disputes have a way of making enemies. Ask your perfect Claire about that, her breath caught. The memory of their last meeting seared back, an argument over their late father's estate. Marcus demanding his share, Daniel refusing. The fallout ending in threats spat across a graveyard. Now Marcus leaned in, voice low and venomous. Maybe he finally saw you for what you are. Maybe that little message wasn't meant for you at all. Claire stiffened. You think he'd reach out to you? After everything? Marcus dropped his suitcase onto the floor with a dull thud. Blood remembers, Claire. No matter how much you try to bury it. Ashcroft's gaze moved between them, weighing every word. You've come a long way back for a brother you claim to hate. Why now? Marcus smiled without warmth. Because when Daniel goes missing, everyone starts digging. And I know what they'll find. Claire's stomach twisted. His words carried a threat deeper than grief, darker than jealousy. Ashcroft leaned forward, his tone cutting. Then perhaps you should start talking. Marcus's smirk widened, but his eyes stayed hard. Be careful what you wish for, Detective. The truth never comes clean. Detective Ashcroft wasted no time after Marcus's arrival. He placed a thick file on the table, the pages spilling loose, stamped with numbers that carried the weight of hidden lives. Bank statements, transfers, and credit slips sprawled like a confession in ink. Daniel Hartwell wasn't just an accountant with a steady salary, Ashcroft said, his tone flat. He was living beyond his means. Trips to Rome, to Lisbon, to Marrakesh. Private hotels, expensive dinners, thousands drained in cash withdrawals. Claire's eyes darted across the papers, her fingers trembling as she reached for one. The receipt glared up at her. 2 nights at a luxury hotel in Florence, signed in Daniel's name. The date struck her hardest. It was during the week he had claimed to be away on business in Manchester. Her chest tightened as anger collided with despair. He told me he was working late building a future for us. Marcus gave a low chuckle from the corner. Future for you? He was bleeding you dry. Enough, Claire snapped, her voice raw, though her hand shook as she twisted her wedding ring until her skin reddened. Ashcroft leaned forward, his words deliberate. Mrs. Hartwell, these aren't the actions of a man planning to come home. He had secret accounts under false names. He wasn't just unfaithful, he was preparing to disappear. The room seemed to tilt around her. Memories flooded back, his guarded tone on phone calls, the sudden rush to close his laptop whenever she entered the room, the unexplained absences. The betrayal was no longer a whisper. It roared, undeniable. Tears blurred her vision as she choked out, So I was never a wife. I was a cover. Ashcroft closed the file, his gaze grim. And yet even men running from their lies don't usually end with a scream. The words hung heavy, pulling her into the question that gnawed beneath every revelation. If Daniel had been playing a double life, then who had silenced him? The revelations about Daniel's secret life had already left Claire hollow, yet one name returned again and again in the detective's questioning. Elena Markham. She had been the last link, the thread knotted around every inconsistency. When Ashcroft insisted on another meeting, Claire went reluctantly, her fury sharpening into a fragile blade. Elena's flat was dim, lit only by the amber glow of a single lamp. Cigarette smoke lingered, though the ashtray sat untouched. A glass of whiskey rested on the table, sweating in the stale air, yet no hand had dared lift it. Elena's eyes were red-rimmed, her face stripped of the mocking bravado she had shown before. "You want the truth?" Her voice cracked. "He came to me that night." Claire's breath caught, the words piercing deeper than any accusation. Elena pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her tone spilling fast as though confession could cauterize the wound. "He was terrified, Claire. Kept saying someone was following him. He looked over his shoulder with every word. I begged him to stay, but he paced like a man already marked. He said he had enemies you didn't know about." Claire's nails cut into her palms. "And then?" Elena's tears slid freely now, catching the lamp's glow. Then he was gone. Just walked out before dawn. No goodbye. No explanation. Only fear written across his face. Ashcroft's stare never wavered, his voice sharp. "And you expect us to believe you let him vanish into the dark?" Elena looked at him, hollow, broken. "Believe what you want. But I didn't kill him. Whatever hunted Daniel that night was bigger than me. Bigger than her, bigger than any affair." Claire's skin prickled, her rage now tangled with dread. If Elena wasn't lying, then Daniel's scream wasn't born from betrayal, but from pursuit. The call came just after dawn. Detective Ashcroft's voice was low, stripped of the usual edge. "Mrs. Hartwell, we've found him." Claire's knees weakened, her hand clutching the wall for balance as the words sank in. Hours later, she stood by the banks of the Avon, where reeds swayed in the morning wind. Blue lights flickered against the dark water, their reflections breaking into jagged shards across the ripples. A fisherman, pale and shaking, pointed towards the water's edge. "I thought it was debris at first. Then I saw the hand." His words barely rose above the hum of radios. Claire's eyes locked on the black body bag as officers dragged it across the mud. The zip closed with a harsh finality, the sound etching itself into her bones. She wanted to scream, to collapse, but only silence escaped her lips. Daniel was gone. Not missing, not hidden. Gone. Ashcroft crouched by the stretcher, examining the bruises that marked Daniel's skin. Blunt trauma. And water in the lungs. He didn't just fall in, Mrs. Hartwell. Someone wanted him there. Marcus stood a few feet away, his arms folded, watching without a flicker of grief. Elena appeared too, drawn by whispers, her eyes red but unreadable. They circled the scene like carrion birds, each carrying secrets of their own. Claire's chest heaved, rage twisting with despair. Part of her shattered at the sight of her husband reduced to evidence, yet another part whispered something she couldn't admit aloud. Relief. The waiting was over. The silence finally had a body. Ashcroft rose, his gaze fixed on the suspects gathering like shadows. "Now we stop asking if Daniel is alive. We start asking who wanted him dead." Claire's breath hitched, her eyes drawn to Marcus as his smirk cut through the grief. The courtroom was a theater of shadows. Claire sat rigid, her hands clasped in her lap as the prosecution dismantled the life she thought she knew. Daniel was no victim of circumstance, they argued. He was a man tangled in debts, double lives, and betrayals. His financial records bled with secrecy, lavish trips, hidden accounts, promises to women who were not his wife. Elena testified first, her voice trembling. "He came to me terrified, said someone was after him. I thought he was unraveling, but then he vanished again." Gasps rippled across the benches when the prosecution shifted focus. Marcus. They laid out his motives with surgical precision. Bitter inheritance disputes, decades of jealousy and a trail of violent outbursts. He sat in the dock, his face a mask of contempt. Yet gaps persisted. No weapon, no witnesses, no certainty. The jury wrestled with shadows, while Claire listened to the fragments of her husband's voice from the recovered phone recording echoing in her skull. "Don't, please," followed by that scream. When the verdict finally came, it was not closure but limbo. Insufficient evidence. Marcus walked free, his smirk lingering as he passed Claire, whispering, "Silence speaks louder than justice." Days later, rain fell heavy on the cemetery grounds. Claire stood alone at Daniel's grave, her black coat plastered to her skin. The headstone was freshly carved, the soil still unsettled. She slipped her wedding ring from her trembling finger, staring at it as if it were a lie cast in gold. With a breath that scraped her lungs, she let it fall. The ring landed in the mud with a muted thud, swallowed by the earth. Her reflection in the polished stone seemed almost foreign. She whispered, not to Daniel, but to herself, "Some truths rot in silence, and some silences never end." The wind howled across the graves, carrying her words into the darkness. Behind her, unseen in the mist, a figure lingered at the edge of the cemetery, watching.